Trying a new video format here called Brilliant, and it should allow each one of these to like brighten in each time and stuff. I don't know if it's going to work out well, but I'm trying it. Let's just continue, because I will be reading this to you at the same time, but there are video clips in between. And this is Egyptian conquests of wretched Cush and vile Nubians they call Troglodytes. Now, African Americans desperately want to believe that the ancient Egyptians were black, and Negrocentric ideologues seek to advance the idea that the Egyptian battles and conquest over Libyans and Asiatic people later equates as evidence that the Egyptians were somehow black, but as we'll see, it's far from the truth. And if that were so, how then does one explain that since before written history, Egyptians were conquering what they call thru Sty, or Nubia? There's no evidence of Egypt having gone to war against Libyans or Asiatics in its early formative years, and happens much later in the dynasties. Relations between Egypt and Nubia were almost always based on Egyptian colonialism. In fact, the relationship between Egypt and Nubia remained one of conflict and suppression for thousands of years. No one can escape the conclusion that the interconnections from Egypt southward were of a mercenary type designed to defeat the enemy on the battlefield. Lower Nubia, receiving the brunt of most of the Egyptian aggression, with them ultimately ending up as provinces whose service to Egypt was all that mattered. They were domesticated by them. So let's look into what was said during the Egyptian conquests of Nubia. Earliest documented Egyptian inscriptions signifying a conflict, the scene records the attack. Senefru, hacking up the land of the Nubians, bringing 7,000 living prisoners. His Majesty made war in the midst of the strongholds among the Urthet Nubians, the Mazoi Nubians, the Yam Nubians, and these are different areas. Yam is around the water and so on. Among the Wawat Nubians, among the Cow Nubians, His Majesty sent me at the head of his army and of the Nubians of these countries. The building of the Tuatua ships of Merwood of 100 capacity and 60 royal boats of 16 capacity raid in the land of the blacks, and the bringing of the 7,000 prisoners and men and women and 20,000 cattle, sheep, and goats, the bringing of 40 ships of cedar wood, and this is by the scribe of Pharaoh Senefru in the 6th Dynasty, way back when. And it tells you here that they do refer to them as blacks and Negroes. And it's a raid in the land of the blacks. They took 7,000 prisoners. They call the land of Egypt Kemet because of black soil. But the phrase here, land of the blacks, is not the same one. This is not raid in Kemet. This is raid in the land of the blacks. And that is different from the land of Egypt, is it not? Clearly expressed. Let's continue and you'll see how clearly it is expressed. By pictures like this. The Majesty of my Lord sent me to hack up Wawat and Urthet. I did so that my Lord praised me. I slew a great number of there, consisting of chiefs, children, and excellent commanders of missing. I brought a great number of them to the court as living prisoners, while I was at the head of many mighty soldiers as a hero. The heart of my Lord was satisfied with me in every commission for which he hath sent. Again, 6th Dynasty, reign of Pepi the second. This is back to 2200 BC. They depicted Nubians quite well. You see that picture. That's a Negroid. The Egyptians are not depicted in any way looking like that. I'm sure you see a lot of black people today that don't quite look as bulbous-headed, prognathic jaws, and things like that, but that's due to much later Caucasian admix that they all have through the slave trade. The coming of the king himself standing behind the hill country, while the chiefs of Mazoi, Earthet, and Wawat, making them smell the earth, did obeisance and gave great praise. This is, he made them bow down. Now, this is in the 6th dynasty also, and of the next pharaoh, Merenre. So all through the 6th dynasty, here they are bowing down, giving praise to the Caucasian Egyptians. Any army I sailed against, I effected its slaughter. At a single stroke, I seized its chiefs and its armies. This is up into the 11th dynasty, Intef the second, a little over 2000 BC. They depicted Negroids quite well. I slaughtered the Nubians on several occasions in Wawat. Then I went south in might, slaughtering the Nubian in his land, and I came north, uprooting the harvest and cutting down the remainder of his trees. And their houses were set on fire, just as it had done to anyone who rebels against the king. 12th dynasty, just before 2000 BC. This is a vizier of Senuseret, a scribe. Recorded for all time, as all these are. Here they are, captured, rope to the neck, and you see what the Egyptians look like. I seized the people of Wawat. He came to overthrow Wawat. 12th dynasty. So it's continuous all the way through. Although there was a gap about 600 years where they killed them off so bad they never showed back up. Look at the Pharaoh Senuseret. I followed my lord when he sailed up the river to overthrow his enemies in the 4 foreign lands. I passed through Ethiopia. In sailing southward, I removed the boundary of the land. He overthrew his enemies in Cush. Following his majesty, I returned sharp the face and without loss of my soldiers. 12th dynasty, Senuseret. 1950 to 1900 BC, almost 2,000 years, 4,000 years ago, people. I brought forth thee all countries which are in Nubia beneath thy feet. And it shows the kings and them below their feet. I reached Nubia of the Negroes. See, they use that word. I forced the Nubian chiefs to wash gold. There's a few inscriptions that talk about how they took the chiefs and they came there and they made them polish all their stuff. Quite often they killed them off right after that, in front of their own people. Amenemhet the second. I followed my lord Pharaoh Sesostris when he sailed southward to overthrow his enemies among the 4 barbarians. I passed Cush, sailing southward. I advanced the boundary of the land. I brought all gifts, my praise, it reached heaven. Then his majesty returned in safety, having overthrown his enemies in Cush, the vile. There was no loss among my soldiers. So he records that he didn't lose anybody and they killed them all off and took them prisoners here. 1800 BC, Amenemhat. It's an Egyptian governor. The kings aren't always involved in it. Now they have warring guys that are going out in parties, just literally hunting and raiding them. As you can see, this clearly depicted Negroid being carried off by a bunch of Caucasian people that are writing down this exact story and the amount of people that they are taking. You look at Senuseret, he's Caucasian also, but of course he is. They all are, and they all hate black people. They call them Troglodytes. It actually means primitive, unaware cave dwellers. I have made my boundary further south than my father's. He's gone deeper. I am a king who attacks to conquer, who is swift to succeed, To stop when attacked is to make bold the foe's heart. Attack is valor, retreat is cowardice. A coward is he who is driven from his border. Since the Nubian listens to the word of mouth, to answer him is to make him retreat. To attack him, he will turn his back. Retreat, and he'll start attacking. They are not people one respects. They are wretches. Sounds kind of familiar. Doesn't it? Craven-hearted. My Majesty has seen it. It is not an untruth. I have captured their women. I have carried off their dependents, gone to their wells and killed their cattle, cut down their grain, set fire to it. As my father lives for me, I speak the truth. As for any son of mine who shall maintain this border which his my Majesty has made, he is my son, born to my Majesty. But he who abandons it, who fails to fight for it, he is not my son. He was not born to me. This is Pharaoh Sesostris III telling you that his children will continue in the legacy of killing off and keeping at bay the Negroids, that, by the way, could go in any direction, but they just keep coming and mooching and coming and mooching. Africa's huge, people. They could go any direction, but they choose not to. These primitive people that the Caucasian Egyptians called Troglodytes, vile and wretched. Southern boundary made in the year 8, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Aegis, Sesostris III, in order to prevent that any Nubian should cross it. They're not allowed. By water or by land, by with a ship or any herds of the Nubians, except a Nubian who shall come to do trading in Iken, or with a commission. Every good thing shall be done with them, but without allowing a ship of the Nubians to pass by, going downstream, forever. This is a decree that they are not allowed to come through Egypt and make it into the rest of the world. Forever. They are not allowed into Egypt except for giving praise. And they say when they're giving praise, they won't do anything bad to them. But let one try to make it past then they will be no more. They are not valiant men. They are miserable, both tails and bodies. My Majesty saw it myself. It is no fable. He probably saw somebody with a vestigial tail when he was killing them all off or something. I'm sure they didn't all have tails. Or maybe they took animal tails and hooked them into their belt loops and stuff, like even some of the pharaohs had done. But because they're very familiar with that, we would realize that that's not the truth, that they probably caught a few of them that still had vestigial tails. And, it even happens to this day still. People get vestigial tails, even white people. I mean, it happens to people. Although there have been more blacks than whites, at least since 1950 in the study that I looked at, when somebody said, white people get tails. And I was like, okay, let's look that up. And the Chicago study said that, no, it's about 3/4 of them are black people, but there are whites that grow tails too. So it's funny how every time they seem to put their foot in their mouth, but yeah. He says it's no fable. Hail to the O Kakure, our Horus, divine of forms, protector of the land, who extends his frontiers and subdues the foreigners with his great crown. He slays the bow people without striking a blow. Who lets fly the arrow without drawing the bow? Fear of whom has smitten the Troglodytes in their own land. Terror of whom has slain the 9 bows, whose slaughter has killed thousands of the bow people who had attacked frontiers. His Majesty's tongues is the restraint of the Southland. His paroles are what puts the savages to flight. A unique and rejuvenating one for his frontiers, who does not weary his serfs, who lets the patricians recline in the sun. His levies sleep, for his heart is their protector. In other words, they can just kick back and sunbathe and do whatever they want to because of this that he has done for them. Yep, they tan. Clearly that showed a Negroid captured by what seems to be a Caucasoid, did it not? Let's go back just a touch, if we can. Now we're going to see Amenhotep. And they always say, oh, they're black pharaohs, oh, they're black pharaohs. Do you see a black person? This is the depictions of Amenhotep. No one sees a black person. Skinny lips, no prognostic jaws sticking out past his nose like black people's do. All these people have tucked jaws, and all those pictures are those way. There's no prognathism with them. There's no giant flared nostrils. There's no bulbous Nubian forehead. There's none of those monikers. But they want to ignore all of that. They just got to have some place they can try to beg off people. It's not going to happen here. These people hated Negroids. It was actually their historical enemy all the way up till the dynasty of the 20s. 18th or 20th dynasty, when they started having wars with other people and problems. Before then, their historical enemy always were Nubians. I sailed with King Emperor. He ascended to the river with Kentheferer in order to cast out violence in the highlands, in order to suppress the raiding of the hill region. I showed bravery in his presence in the bad water. In the passage of the ship by the bend, His Majesty was a furious threat. Like a panther, His Majesty cast his lance first. Their people were brought off as living prisoners. Most of these battles, they have very few losses, or at least they record very few losses. His Majesty sailed down the river with all their countries in his grasp. That wretched Nubian Troglodyte, being hanged head downward at the prow of the large barge of His Majesty, and landed at Karnak. In other words, they hung the guy upside down on the front of the barge, like when you used to see all the women on the front of barges and in the front of boats, back through all the, Nina, Pinta, Santorini, and all the pirates and things, and they had the weird things out front. Well, could be this is where it came from, where he originally took his enemy and tied him to the bow of their boat and went all the way down the Nile until they landed at Karnak in front of everyone. Then His Majesty smote that Nubian Troglodyte in the midst of his army, and brought them off in a stranglehold without any loss. Those who fled were laid prostrate as though they had never been. In other words, anyone that tried to run was killed and laid flat on the ground. Amenhotep first, 1526 to 1506 BC, transposed by Redford in 2006. You can see any of these you want. You can see any of these want and look them up. Black people will not look for this information, though, because they desperately don't want to be who they are. And they try to say that they were somehow... Of course, everyone knows the Negroids of the slave trade had no previous contact with any of these people, but they just want some black person somewhere to have done something, or at least want you to believe it. I sailed with King Deshakari, Amenhotep first, triumphant when he ascended to the river to Cush. They captured that Nubian Troglodyte in the midst of his army, who were brought away as prisoners, none of them missing. I fought incredibly. His Majesty beheld my bravery. So this is Ahmose speaking. Ahmose, son of Abana. There came the enemy of the south. His fate, his destruction approached. In other words, here he comes to the slaughter, like it says in the Bible. And there they are. So now we get to Thutmose's reign. It's just a little bit past that. And Thutmose has, like all the Egyptians, a pale wife that you see here that Negroes couldn't pull off even if they tried the Michael Jackson lightning routine on. And then these tanned Caucasians here with their definite Caucasian looks. See? No prognostic jaw, no big lips, no big nose. Roman-esque looking nose. Yeah, Let's see what he says. He, Thutmose, was overthrown, the chief of the Nubians. The Nubian is helpless, defenseless in his grasp. He has united the boundaries of his two sides. There is not a remnant of the curly-haired who had come to attack him. There is not a single survivor among them. The Nubian Troglodytes, boy, they throw that out there, Troglodytes. Again, it means primitive, unaware, cave-dwelling people. The Nubian Troglodytes fall by the sword and are thrust aside in their lands, their foulness. It floods their valleys of their mouth like a violent flood. The fragments cut from them are too much for the birds. So they used to let the birds just come and pick the things to death and stuff, and they go, man, we've killed them all off. There's just way too many people out here even for the birds to come and pick out, and they're just going to leave it to rot in their land. In their land. Thutmose I, 1500 BC. Now we're slowly approaching the time whenever they start to actually eventually domesticate them. But we're not there yet, as you can easily tell from what gets said. The lords of the palace have made a fortress for his army. None faces him among the 9 bows together. Like a young panther among the fleeing cattle are the fame of his majesty blind them. His southern boundary is far as the frontier of this land. Northern boundary as far as the inverted water which goes downstream and going upstream. In other words, he reaches all the way up to the Tassarex to where the giant waterfall is, and that's all his from there back. So he's reclaimed all the way up the Nile back towards there from any that had ever been lost before. He talks about the 9 bows, and the reason he talks about the 9 bows is because there seems to be 9 little tribal black people that groups of them get together and try to do this warring thing and come and steal from the Egyptians or dig up their necrotified bodies, and it says they eat them and things. But they kept them from that, and they eventually moved the necropolis much closer in place they could protect from such matters. But the 9 bows are 9 tribes that really couldn't get their crap together. They weren't even a unified people as it was. You say Nubians, but he's calling all those people in there Nubians and Cushites as it gets to here. But there was 9 of them, not a single. Year 3, first month of the 3rd season, day 22, under the majesty of King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Akapari, who has given life, his majesty commanded to dig this canal after he found it stopped up with stones, so that no ship sailed upon it. Year 3, first month of the 3rd season, day 20, his majesty sailed this canal in victory and in the power of his return from overthrowing the wretched Cush. So apparently the Cushites had come down and thrown a bunch of rocks in there, so they couldn't get their ships with all their people back up the Nile and with all their equipment and attack them again. They thought it was a great idea. Well, they went up there and they cleared out the rocks and then went in and overthrew wretched Cush again. Doesn't seem like they're losing to these guys ever, does it? Seems like they're always just massively defeating these guys as if they were primitive, troglodyte Negroids with no awareness to reality and an easily defeated foe. And they are. The lords of the palace have made a fortress or his army. None faces him among the 9 bows. Like a young panther among the fleeing cattle, fame of his majesty blinded them. His southern boundary as far as the frontier of this land, northern boundary as far. So this is another retelling of the same one, but the northern boundary is as far as the inverted water, which goes downstream and going upstream. So the impassable cataract. As for any Nubian, he shall transgress this stela, which is placed at a boundary, which my father Amun has given to me, his chieftains will be slain. He shall endure in my grasp. The sky shall not rain for him, his cattle not calve. There shall be no heir of his upon the earth. In other words, if black people come past this boundary, they will kill them. And they put another boundary out that says that if they chop off their hand and give that to them, that's enough to say that they must have killed them, or they took the power of them to even carry a weapon anymore. And that hand was worth more than a live slave was. making hunting Negroids a thing that would help them to keep the boundaries safe, but also to keep people extremely rich in the land by protecting their own land. That's at the boundary still of Thutmose. You can still see it and read it to this day. His Majesty passed this canal in force and power in his campaign to crush Ethiopia the Vile. 18th dynasty we're at now, people, so we've gone all the way through 4th, 5th, 6th. So you see here, here's the Caucasian tan guy riding on chariots with domesticated animals. Negroids didn't even have any at the time. Later they got them through a manky see, manky do type of thing. But, oh, look at these prisoners all bound up that he's strapped through doing. Got this one here stuck right behind the ass of the horse. Yeah, and look how the Nubians look like black people. And that doesn't. Notice how his jaw doesn't stick out past his nose. And yet that one does. And these do. And we're going to go back just a hair and look at that. I'm sorry I keep doing that. But we're going to go back and look at that and show you just how Caucasian this man is. With his little bitty nose, his non-prognostic jaw, non-bulbous forehead. Look at that great Caucasian right there. One came to inform His Majesty as follows: Wretched Cush has begun to rebel. Those who were under the domination of the Lord of the two lands propose hostility, beginning to smite him. The inhabitants of Egypt are about to bring away the cattle behind his fortress, which thy father built in his campaigns, in order to repulse the rebellious barbarians, the Nubian Troglodytes of Kenthenefer. Again with the Troglodytes. So as you can see, they are called blacks, they are called Negroes, they are called Nubian Troglodytes, which again means primitive, unaware, cave-dwelling people. But that's the only mention of blacks anywhere in Egypt, all the way through to this point. Their enemy, their sworn enemy. For those who are there in the north of Wretched Cush, His Majesty was furious. Like a panther, he said, His Majesty, I will not live anyone among their males. Then His Majesty dispatched a numerous army into Nubia on his first occasion of a campaign in order to overthrow all those who were rebellious against His Majesty or hostile to the Lord of the two lands. So the king in Lower Egypt went up to Upper Egypt and destroyed these guys. When this army of His Majesty arrived at Wretched Cush, his army overthrew those barbarians. They did not let live any among their males, except one of the children of the chief of Wretched Cush, who was taken away alive as a living prisoner with their people to His Majesty. This land was made a subject of His Majesty as formerly. Now, this is 18th dynasty, but they took that prince away. And what they're going to try to do is teach him, domesticate him, and then they're going to put him back in position over their own people so they won't act a fool anymore. Now, everybody, oh, black people, black people. Well, look at the black people getting smoted in the Orion position here. This is the position of Orion, the hunter, the Aryan Orion hunter, smoting his Negroid. And wow, look how Caucasian that guy looks. List of the countries of the south, the Nubian Troglodytes of Kenthenefer, whom His Majesty overthrew, making a great slaughter among them, whose number is unknown, and carrying away all their subjects as living captives to Thebes, in order to fill the storehouse. Among the Nubians given from chiefs and living captives, then, when Wretched Cush was overthrown. Now we're at about 1400 or a little bit more BC. Have bound together the Nubian Troglodytes, the tens of thousands and thousands. I have come, causing thee to smite the Nubian Troglodytes. Many a picture shows lions eating and destroying and grabbing Negroids by the head. Hatshepsut. Look how Caucasian this guy looks here. How can Negroids look at any of this? Do they study anything? Have they done even a cursory study of Egypt? No, no. They're racist people, have gotten together and tried to pick around through it and see if they can tear it apart to where it seems like it might be a question that they were black or not. Yeah, look at this guy. Yeah. And what are his words? Well, his words are Nubian black people are troglodytes. The Negroes are troglodytes, which again means primitive, unaware, cave-dwelling people. Smite with the mace the troglodytes. Thou shalt cut off the heads of their soldiers. I filled it with captives from the south, the children of the chiefs of Kennethver. Smote him in the Orion position. Amenhotep. Very Caucasian again. Got a Greek nose. Don't be at all lenient with the Nubian. Beware of their people. They're magicians. And the other fallen was taken upriver to Nubia and hanged on the walls of Napata in order to cause to be manifest the victories of his majesty forever and ever in all the lands and countries of the Nubians, since he had taken the southerners, that he might make his boundary as far as he desired, none opposing his hands. Among the troglodyte Negroes, which look just like this and not near the color of these Caucasian Egyptians that are shown tan with their pale wives, one came to say to his majesty, the Nubian descends from above Wawet. He hath planned revolt against Egypt. He gathers himself all the barbarians of the revolters of other countries. So he's now trying to get together an army of everybody. His majesty proceeded to overthrow the Nubian in Nubia. He found all the foes scattered in inaccessible valleys. So, they got them all together, and he went out there and just whooped their ass again. Now we're breaking under 1400 BC, and you can see them enslaved, correctly drawn, and Caucasian Egyptians correctly gone. His Majesty returned, having triumphed on his first victorious campaign in the land of Wretched Cush, having made his boundary as far as he desired. Amenhotep III. Nubians, this army, while their hearts were eager to fight quickly, of the Nubians who fell, in order that my majesty might know, because he did this. It was not commanded for them. His majesty smote them himself with a baton which was in his hand. His majesty commanded that 124 men of the army be dispatched, living captives, which they found among them, Nubians, 113 cattle, male and female, 11 asses or donkeys, male and female. And this would be because they had probably stolen them or done things like that, that they were trying to mock them with their cattle development and their grain and things. Mighty in dragging them in his chariot, annihilating the heir of Wretched Cush, bringing their princes as living prisoners, every country, Wretched Cush, are at the feet of this good God, the Caucasian God of the Egyptians. Mightily in dragging them in his chariot, annihilating of their Wretched Cush, the heir of Wretched Cush. So they took their kings and dragged them behind the chariots. Amenhotep III, 18th Dynasty. When I turn my face to the south, I work a wonder for you. I cause the chiefs of Wretched Cush to turn to you, bearing all their tribute upon their backs. They present themselves to you with their children in order that you may give them the breath of life. The god Amun to Amenhotep III. The might of the Nimbarte took them in one day, 1 hour, making a great slaughter. Their cattle, not one of them escaped. Each one of them was brought. The might of Amenhotep took them. The barbarians among them, male as well as female, were not separated. By the plan of Horus, Lord of the two lands, King Nimbarte, mighty bull, strong in might, Ibhet had been haughty, Great things were in their hearts, but their fierce-eyed lion, this ruler, he slew them by command of Amunatun, his august father. It was he who led him in might in victory. List of the captivity which His Majesty took, and again it's the same list here, but it breaks it down and it tells you that they have Negroes, 150 heads. It doesn't call them Troglodytes, it doesn't call them Nubians, it calls them Negroes, meaning black people. So that name doesn't come from the 1300s AD, does it? Archers, Negresses, 250 heads. Much more women than men. Servants of the Negroes, 55 heads. Their children, 175 heads. Total, 740 living heads. Hands thereof, like I told you, the hands were worth money, 312. Uniting with the living heads, 1,052. The king's son, vigilant for his lord, favorite of the good God, governor of the entire land of Cush, king scribe, Mermos. So this is a time whenever the land of Cush had Caucasian rulers over it and scribes, making sure crap was going right. Black people, Caucasian ruler, in Cush. He saith, Praise to thee, O God, good God. Great is thy might against him that confronts thee. Thou causest them that are rebellious against thee to say, The fire that they have made rages against us. Thou hast slain all the enemies, overthrown beneath thy feet. And that's Mermos, 1350 BC-ish. Amenhotep III, during that reign. The might of Nebmare, Amenhotep III, took them in 1 day, 1 hour, making the captives. And again, here's the list of them with the living. Now, in this other scribe writes them as being living Nubians, heads, archers, Nubian females. So you can see Nubian females are Negroids. Males are Negroids. And they're making that distinction because they're not Negroids. Of course. Mighty in dragging them in his chariot, annihilating the heir of wretched Cush. And there's so many depictions of Negroids getting run over by chariots, that are being crushed by animals, that are, being attacked by dogs. I don't know how they've avoided those pictures, but they sure avoid them whenever they make their racist little videos, and they avoid the pictures of the very pale Caucasian-looking women too, don't they? The Nubians collapsed in the blink of an eye, their chiefs having succumbed to the slaughter whenever they violate our boundaries. His Majesty, may he live, be prosperous and healthy. Again, Negroids aren't allowed in Egypt. People say, oh, well, they were mixed and they were getting along. No, they weren't allowed in Egypt until much, much later. We're way up to the 20th dynasty now, and they are not allowed out. You are like Montu. You are like Montu. O ruler, you are like Montu. You are like Montu in the midst of your army, the gods being in protection of your limbs. You attack, having succeeded against wretched Cush. This is soldiers of Neb-Herkapare, Tutankhamun, Temple of Thebes, 1336 BC. Now, Montu was the governor, I believe, of the upper area of Egypt at the time. I believe that's Montu, but so look at these pictures here, and you can see these Negroids getting crushed by the Caucasian Egyptians. And this symbolic scene here, where they're just getting run over. They're like, nah, they're getting run over, getting squished, getting crushed. Sure enough, are chariot scenes like this that are all too telling whenever you get a good close look and realize that hunting dogs are attacking Negroids, and it's Caucasian tan people running over black people with chariots. This is black people in Egypt. This is what black people could expect whenever they're around Egypt. Hemnahoreb, boy, he's a Caucasian. The good God comes. He triumphs over the princes of every country, his bow in his hand, like the Lord of Thebes, Montu. Yeah, see, okay, so yeah. Puissant king. Now, puissant, that's strange that they have that in there, but puissant is a word that we rarely use nowadays. Puissance used to be dexterity and strength, somebody showing extreme prowess. Now it's relegated towards jumping horses. And whenever they do their jumping horse routines, they are said to show puissance. But it used to be an expression for people, and that is a French word. Note that the Levant is a French word also. Mighty in strength, who carries away the princes of wretched Cush, King Zescapre. And here they are carrying away those prognostic. Oh, gotta take a look at that. One more time on that. Let's see. Yeah. 10 Caucasian, 10 Caucasian. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Seti. Take to thyself the sword, O mighty king, Horus of the bows, in order to overthrow the chiefs of Cush, the wretched. In order to cut off their heads, thy terror enters into their body like Sekhmet when she rages. And this is in the 19th dynasty, Seti the First. A very important pharaoh. Black people, curly hair, getting eaten by a lion. Ramses, the Caucasian guy with the big Greek nose. Let's look at that. King Ramses II, his fame is mighty in missing. The land of the Negro, with valor slaying the Troglodytes of wretched Cush. In the victories of his mighty sword, he causes Egypt to be joyful. 19th dynasty, Negroids are still called Troglodytes. They hadn't been domesticated. Thoth hadn't been caught up in the middle of it yet. And they are called Negroes. Good God, repulsing the 9 bows, smiting the rebels. The earth is established, heaven is satisfied, the divine Ennead, that's Greek, is content with his qualities, the bull, mighty against Cush, the wretched, smiting the rebels as far as the land of the Negro. His hoofs trample the Troglodytes, his horns gores into them, his fame is mighty in Kennethapor. As far as his terror, it has reached Karoi, which is way up the cataracts of the Nile. Black people bringing praise. Black people steer away from this one so bad, but here you show that the Caucasian Egyptians are going against 3 different races of people, and that one right there is black. They always avoid that. What is this supposed to symbolize? Yeah. Notice how the Egyptian was the same color as the Caucasian people, and the Negro was the darker one. That's about enough of it this time, but I've got about enough to do 2 more videos of the same type of information where constantly they're referred to as Troglodyte Nubians, primitive, unaware cave-dwelling people, wretched and vile, and that Negroes aren't allowed in Egypt. So let's try that again, black people. You aren't the Moors either. You're actually a West African people that are primitive and to this day are illiterate and live in dung huts. Like, share, and subscribe, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry, it's the truth that the world knows.